Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Soul Symphony. Thank you for tuning into my channel. My name is Z. The content you find here is mostly about healing. I hope the information you find here helps you if you are on your healing journey. If you're not on a healing journey, that's okay too. Just pass it along to whoever might need it. And when you decide to get on your healing journey, the information will be here. All right, so today I'll go and talk about detachment, right? So detachment, most of the time when we talk about detachment, it's linked to a negative connotation to it. That when you detach, you're cold or you just heartless, right? But in general, detachment can be good or bad. It's not really a good thing all the time. It's not also a bad thing all the time. So we have healthy detachment and we have unhealthy detachment. So in this case, I'll talk about both. So healthy detachment is sometimes very much necessary, especially in traumatic experiences or abusive relationships, because in order for us to be able to actually see it in a third person's perspective and have an a I would say a third person's point of view, right? It's not his point of view, her point of view, it's not their point of view, it's not my point of view, it's somebody else's point of view, which is most of the time unbiased point of view, right? So in order for us to be able to step into that third person's shoe, that unbiased point of view, we have to be able to detach from the situation to see it in a different perspective. In a different perspective, not in the sense that it benefits us or benefits the other person. More like in the sense that there's no specifically, no, it's not benefiting no one specifically, just to see it as it is, right? The situation as it is. And that will allow us to actually have ways to come up with solutions that are not based on emotions. Because sometimes when we make decisions based on emotions, right, we most likely to go into making brisk decisions. I would say decisions that might not be most of the time good for us, or decisions that might be rushed, or decisions that might actually be detrimental to our health, actually, not only our health, but our safety, especially in, I would say, in abusive relationships. Sometimes certain decisions can be very detrimental. They can be a safety hazard, right? Certain decisions. So we have to be able to sit down and understand that detaching in an unhealthy way will allow us to see situations that sometimes we might not be able to have a solution to those situations if we are very emotional, we are very in a different state of mind that is not conducive to having certain solutions that will be beneficial to us. So that's one of the reasons detachment, the healthy detachment, is actually something that is very much necessary in certain situations. And most of the time, also, I would call it just unbiased point of view. To be able to have an unbiased point of view, you have to detach. You cannot have you cannot have an unbiased point of view, an unbiased art. I would say an unbiased view on a problem or on a situation if we are not detached completely to from that, and then just make the solution, make a I would say a general, not necessarily general, it can be a specific, but I would say mostly like making sure that we make a decision that is not going to impact us in a negative way and also not impact the other person in a negative way. But unfortunately, in certain situations, no matter what we do, somebody will get hurt, especially when it comes to, again, abusive relationships. If we leave the abusive relationship, even though we are there to save ourselves, right, from being abused, if children are involved, they will be impacted in a negative way, no matter what. And the person too might be impacted in a certain way, especially if they have mental health disorders that can actually trigger uh, mental health. It can exacerbate some of that mental health, those mental health disorders. So that are they hurting in that case? Absolutely. But again, making sure that we just make sure that we use detachment, a healthy detachment, to help us make a sound minded decision when it comes to exiting, especially abusive relationships. So, in that case, I would say that detachment is not always unhealthy. Now, there are cases that detachment is unhealthy, and that's unfortunately sometimes after exiting even an abusive relationship or a traumatic experience or an event, we can end up having an unhealthy detachment, which make our emotions numb. We become numb because it's almost like it, I would say, a dissociation from our normal psyche. So that can be, that's something that we see sometimes, most of the time actually, I would say, in certain mental disorders, certain mental disorders such as PTSD and psychiatric disorders. PTSD is one of it. Sometimes the person can be dissociated, especially if the person have recurring anxiety or recurring dreams about the event that happened. And especially people who went through chronic PTSD, who went through chronically being abused. So they end up with CPTSD, which is, again, having the recurring event, having dreams, having nightmares about that recurring event can trigger the person having to detach in a certain way for them to be able to not remember that specific event, so that they can kind of try to control the, I would say, the recurring events, reliving the situation that can actually trigger their anxiety and panic attacks. Depression also can be associated with PTSD, unfortunately. But in another way, there's also by people who have split personality disorder can also have that. Sometimes even bipolar disorder, people who have bipolar disorder can have it. Certain psychotic episodes can also trigger people to have that, to dissociate and detach completely from reality. And they can end up, they're just being in their own world and not even paying attention at all to what's going on around them. And not just only not paying attention, it's more like not having a clue of what's going on. Because sometimes when we say we're not paying attention, sometimes that's a little bit, there's a voluntary part of it. We don't want to pay attention. I don't want to pay attention to what's going on around me. But when it comes to the mental health disorder, sometimes it's not voluntary, it's involuntary. It's very much involuntary. The detachment is involuntary. It's not something that we just decide, oh, today I'm just going to go ahead and switch on and off my detachment, and then I'll go ahead and just detach, right? That's not how it works, more unfortunately, with mental health disorders. So that's sometimes how we can see certain people can be aloof. We see them as aloof, or we see them as cold or heartless, right? But again, that aspect of that mental health disorder that's actually showing as them being aloof. It's not something that they just voluntarily decide, oh, today I'm just going to be heartless to people. But that's something also that is a continuous thing. It's not something that comes and goes. And in certain cases, actually, it does come and go. And that's what also tells us that the person probably might not be on their medication, or they probably having an episode, right, of that specific disorder. So again, that's more like of the unhealthy detachment side of things. So that's why when we see someone have, and all those again can be triggered, CPTSD, I would say split personality disorder, it can actually be I would say it can be the result of abuse, like especially early childhood abuse, especially the split personality disorder. That can be a psyche's way to actually split. It's literally the psyche splits in order for the psyche to help the person actually survive the trauma. But unfortunately, the psyche suffers instead of the physical side of things. The psyche is the one that suffers from it, right? So we have to pay attention to those things. If we see that person, if we see someone, we have someone around us that is showing stuff like that, that's showing symptoms like that. showing signs of detachment, it's not necessarily that they just today decide to date to just be heartless, or tomorrow, or they always just like that, right? So it's more like for us to ask ourselves, what's the reason why they like that? What's the reason they're showing those symptoms? What's the reason they're showing those signs, right? That's not just something that some people that we decide to just turn on and off. Especially, again, it can be linked to mental health disorders. So we have to be very much mindful of that. And so the healthy detachment side of things, in order for us to be able to consistently, or not consistently, but when needed, it's something that we can switch on and off. When it's healthy, we can switch it on and off. But it's mostly linked to a secure attachment style. When we grow up in a household where all our emotional needs are met, all our needs pretty much are met by our caregivers, mom, dad, grandmother, whoever that might be, right? When those needs are fulfilled, emotional, physical, financial, all that, all the other, the presence, right? We have that parent who's present, who actually takes care of us, who's attentive, who listens, who is emotionally present, who is not just financially taking care of us and not caring about our emotions, but they also care about our emotions, making sure that we fulfill emotionally. So we grow up having a secure attachment style. So we learn to regulate our emotions properly. We learn to also express our emotions, not only regulate them, but express them in a healthy way. And we end up in healthy relationships and healthy partnerships, platonic, romantic. We end up being with people that are most of the time similar to our attachment style, because similar attracts similar, unfortunately. Like I was mentioning in my other video, when it comes to attachment style, people who have avoidant attachment style are more likely to attract people who have anxious attachment style. Even though those two might sound as counter uh, opposites, right? Opposite attachment style, but technically they're not, because they manifest in a different way, but they come from the same environment, very similar environment. So there is a familiarity there. Those two attachment style attract each other because there is a familiarity. We recognize each other. We see that we have similar wounding. We see that we have similar traumatic experiences, so we can relate. So because we can relate, therefore, we're more likely to have something in common. Because we have something in common, we're more likely to actually bond. So it's a trauma bond, right? So it's a trauma bond. So in that sense, if we look back at the secure attachment style, that child has the opposite of what those two have. So they had the opposite. They had the healthy environment to be able to securely grow up, to be able to be secure in themselves. So when they grow up, they don't have all the extra things that come with not having a healthy environment, right? So they end up they end up attracting similar things, similar people who have a secure attachment style. And even if they attract someone who has, uh, I would say, anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style, it would not work, because it will not work once it comes to understanding each other. It will not work because those two are not very much, unless the person who has the unhealthy attachment style heals and goes to therapy, understands that, okay, my attachment style is unhealthy, and kind of processes it and heals it, it will not work, because it's something that, again, someone who has a secure attachment style will not allow certain things that come with being with someone with an avoidant attachment style. Because of, again, someone with an avoidant attachment style will disappear for time at a time, right? Disappear, not want to be very much vocal about their feelings, not being able to basically provide what's needed to have a healthy relationship, which is communication, the number one thing really in a relationship for it to even work. The superficial attraction is not the thing. It's more the communication. The relationships, the number one thing in a relationship is really communication. That's the number one thing. If we cannot communicate, we have different styles of communication, it will not work. So someone with secure attachment style have a completely different communication style than someone who has an unhealthy attachment style. So that's the reason it will not work, right? That's the reason it will not work. So if we go back again to detachment style, people with healthy, secure attachment style are more likely to have a healthy detachment. They will be able to detach in a healthy way. They will be able to look at problems, to look at a situation and see it in a bird's eye view and be able to detach and see it from a higher perspective, a higher scope, and be able to decide that, okay, if I do A, B, C, D, then this is what the outcome will be. And they will not actually put in any of their own feelings into the situation. So therefore, the outcome is an outcome that comes from an unbiased point of view. So that's what we have to be very much mindful of, that our attachment style has it has a ripple effect. It has literally a ripple effect. Almost in every single topic that I have talked about so far, I have mentioned attachment style, because that attachment style is one of the main component of the way actually we will branch out in any and every aspect in our lives. Romantic is number one, and then everything else also is not only romantic. Even though most of the time when we talk about attachment style, we see it more like it affects mostly the romantic side of our lives, but it's not only the romantic. It affects every part of our life when it comes to attachment style. So we have to be very much mindful of that, to know our attachment style in order for us to even be able to see how is it affecting all the different aspects of our lives when it comes to romantic, platonic, financial, work relationships, and our spiritual also journey. If we decide to go on a spiritual journey, how is it affecting us? How can we start healing, right? So that's the biggest thing, to be able to identify our attachment style. That's very important. That's very important in our healing journey. So when it comes to the unhealthy detachment, again, that it's not only that we see it in people and individuals with mental health disorders, but it's also something that we see in people with avoidant attachment style, because that's the number one thing for avoidant attachment style. That's the detachment part of things. And someone with avoidant attachment style avoids, and avoiding something is the same as detaching, right? It's the same as detaching. So we are more likely to disappear and disconnect and go away, just not want to deal with it. So that's literally what avoidant attachment style, that's the number one key when it comes to avoidant attachment style. That's the number one manifestation of an avoidant attachment, or an avoidant, when it comes to um, feelings, emotions, right? Because detachment is literally being able to disconnect. Now, we can disconnect physically, we can also disconnect emotionally. But in avoidant attachment style, it's both. It depends on the situation, but it's both. In order for an avoidant to be able to actually detach physically, they have to detach emotionally first. And in also, even in an unhealthy way, even in a healthy way, in order for us to detach health in a healthy way, we have to be able to emotionally detach from a situation in order for us to detach physically from it. And sometimes, even in abusive relationships, sometimes not necessarily that we can completely detach emotionally, but being able to detach physically or emotionally, depending on the situation, that's the key. Detaching, that's the key. Because if it's a situation where, no matter sometimes how abusive a person can be, unfortunately, toward people, people will still stay in the situation and they will still continue to love that person. They will still continue to pour into that person. That does not allow them necessarily, they don't allow themselves necessarily to detach from loving them. And it's not something that just can happen overnight, to be like, oh, I'm just gonna switch on and off how my heart feels, how if my heart will just continue loving this person or not. That's not something that happens in a day or 2 days, right? But just being able to not sporadically, when I say emotional detachment, it's more like to be able to not have rage, have um, resentment, have not be so sporadic into making that decision, not being enraged, not being really in a combative way making that decision. It's mostly really to be able to contain certain emotions while making those decisions so that we can have a clear mind. That's the detachment. That's the essential part of detaching in a healthy way to be able to see the situation. Now, when it comes to matter of the heart, we might not be able to detach from just to say, "Oh, today I'm just gonna to decide not to love this person no more." That's not how it works, unfortunately. If it did, in certain situations it would be great, but that's not how it goes, unfortunately. Sometimes it can take months, years to even actually completely get over a person. But more like to be able to emotionally say, hey, I need to be able to sit down and not put in any emotions, having a just blank mind when we making that decision, right? That's the key for the healthy detachment. Now, we have in certain cases too, certain careers do allow us. I would not say allow us to um, require us to be able to detach, emotionally detach, to be able to actually serve our purpose in that job or that career, right? In the military, for example, there are certain jobs, certain I would say certain certain branches, certain missions that people have to be emotionally detached in order for them to keep their sanity. They have to be able to detach emotionally to execute what their tasks are, in order for them to be able not to end up, unfortunately, with PTSD later on. So that's just one of the careers in the medical field too. In the medical field, we have to be able to detach, like voluntarily in certain I would say in certain specific specialties. We have to be able to detach, to see, to not have our own personal feelings into the situation, to detach our emotions in order for us to be able to take care of actually those patients the right way. Right? Now, there's nothing wrong with sympathizing with how they're feeling. But again, we have to sometimes be able to detach, to be able to do what we're supposed to do without having all our emotions in the wrong places. Now, I would say in everyday life, there are situations that we have to detach from too, especially when we have children and we're trying to discipline them. We have to be able to detach a little bit emotionally from what's going on to discipline them, to give them consequences for certain actions, and not having to really feel so bad about why we're disciplining them. That's just another day-to-day thing that we can actually practice. If we have children, we can practice detachment from certain situations to say, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and do this, and then, not have our emotions pour into it. Because I know sometimes it can be hard to see our child cry because we're giving them a consequence for something they're not supposed to be doing. But again, at the end of the day, it's why we're doing it to begin with, is to be able to teach them discipline. In order for us to teach them discipline, we have to be able to make them understand that actions have consequences. So we have to make them understand that. And we can only make them understand that by showing them with actions, right? Showing them that, okay, you did this is the consequence. Hey, I'm going to take your favorite toy away, or I'm going to go ahead and just whatever, I guess, is appropriate for that specific parent for us to discipline, because every parent parents differently. So we have to be able to just see what works best for us in disciplining our children. Right now, corporal punishment, some people use that, and personally, I don't think that that's something that that's not something that we should use. That's just my opinion, right? Because again, there's a thin line between corporal punishment for consequences and physical abuse. There's a very thin line between those two. And me having to experience that in childhood, I would not say to no one, I would not advise no one to use corporal punishment as a consequence for their children, as a way to discipline their children. So that's just my opinion on it. All right. So there are so many different things that detachment can actually, it's very important for us to know how to detach, to just be able to put our emotions on the side and objectively and logically see a situation and then make our decision from that. That's very important for us to be able to practice on a daily basis. Now, I would say that that's just the biggest thing. I would not say that it's a bad thing to detach, right? But it's mostly, if it's something that happens all the time, every time, for us to be able to understand that it's unhealthy, it falls into the category of unhealthy. And for us to investigate the reason why we are detached all the time, every time, right? Especially if family members, friends, and people around us tell us that you never here, like mentally, you never here. You always somewhere. You're not really present. So when people especially mention those things to us, we have to be able to understand that it's not because they're trying to criticize us. It's more like to try to pinpoint to us that there's something going on. And we have to ask ourselves, is it true what they're saying? Just introspectively go in and look at the situation and see if actually what they're pointing out is the reality. And if it's the reality, we have to be able to ask ourselves, why am I feeling that way? And if there's a need to go see a healthcare provider, or to just investigate it to see the reason why we feel that way or why we behave that way. Is it because of, again, our attachment style? Is it because of, let's say, we have some mental health disorders? Is it because maybe the medication need to be readjusted if we're on medication? Or is it that we just need to actually go get diagnosis to begin with and then be on medication? So that's something that we have to be mindful of. But I would say that it's not something that we should heal on our own, really. It's more like to investigate it and see a healthcare professional if needed. Because healthy detachment does exist. And it's most of the time when it comes to detachment, period, I think that is beneficial, especially in our healing journey. I don't see it as a negative thing. Most of the time, I don't see it as a negative thing, even though when we mention it on a day-to-day basis or people talk about detachment, it comes as mostly has a negative connotation to it. So it's important for us to see it as it's good to have a healthy detachment, to be able to have a healthy detachment skill to just detach and say, hey, this situation is not working. I gotta go. So it's just that, because sometimes there's no need to negotiate. There is no need to try to work things out. There's no need to try to figure it out. Sometimes it's just that once we sit down and logically, objectively look at a situation and do the pros and cons on a situation, right? That allows us to know, is it time to go, or is it time to stay? Is it time to make changes, or is it time to just abandon it altogether? Right? So that's how I see it. Detachment is, most of the time, I will say, it's healthy. At least in my experience, it has served me mostly in a healthy way, right? In a healthy way. So we just have to be mindful that this can be as a tool. It can be as a tool in our healing journey to take us to be able to exit situations, or to objectively look at a situation and tell ourselves that, so basically making decisions of head over heart, because most of the time we stay in situations that are harmful to us because we tend to have decisions that we make to stay in those environments. We make those decisions with our heart because we love the person. Oh, we cannot probably we might not be able to take care of ourselves because of this or this or that. It's mostly a heart situation, a heart over head situation. So I would say we do not really sit down and logically look at the situation and see how is it detrimental to us. What is it actually bringing to us? What are the pros and cons? Is it bringing us more positive or more negative? And just write it down. That's the main thing. In in the case that we decide to use detachment as a way to help us a make an exit, right? Make a decision to exit a situation or to just overall look at a situation. Making a list of pros and cons is the number one thing that should come in mind. Making a list of pros and cons. How much is this person or this situation giving me positively or serving me positively? How much is this situation serving me, or I guess disservice in that case, in a negative way, because it will be a disservice to us, right? So we have to make the pros and cons, a list of things to see what is this situation bringing to me. Is it bringing more positives than negative, or is it bringing more negatives than positive? And write down every single one and just look at each one, making two columns, looking both of them and seeing how is that going to also impact us in the long term. It's not just a today thing. It's long term. How has it impacted us? And how is it going to impact us if we stay in that situation 10 years, 20 more years to come? We have to make that, because in my case specifically, I remember I had to make a list of pros and cons in my case before I actually exited that relationship, that marriage, I would say. Because I had to look at my case and say to myself, and when I did the pros and cons, that's something I never actually considered until way later on. Once I did that, I looked at the pros and cons. I was like, good God, I should have done this a long time ago. But again, when you don't know, you just don't know. When you don't know, you just don't know. You cannot do better when you don't know. You cannot choose better when you don't know. But then again, if we know and we still keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result, then that's when we actually abandoning ourselves. We are abandoning ourselves in the detriment of the other person. We are abandoning ourselves for just life to literally happen, right? And we're not supposed to be doing that, because if we don't take care of ourselves, who should take care of us better than us? Now, it's not selfish to say, hey, I need to take care of me. It is not selfish, even though I know over time, some people will say, oh, that's so selfish for you to leave your home. That's so selfish for you to break the family, the kids, this and that. That's so selfish. That's so selfish. But then the children themselves, at least in my case, I realize that in certain situations, for sure, it's so much better, because children themselves, they grow up in an unhealthy environment. Therefore, guess what they do? They pick up all those things that they have seen happening in that unhealthy environment. But when we detach from that environment and the kids are not there, so they would not, yes, it's not good for children not to be in the same household as their both parents or caregivers, right? How 2-3 caregivers or whoever is taking care of them. But at the end of the day, but in a traditional sense, right, we say having mother and father both in the same household, both parents in the same household, it's not good for children, right? Because again, the biggest thing is that they do not get to see the dynamic between mom and dad as how a relationship should function as a unit, right? That's the biggest thing. So when they don't grow up in that kind of environment, they don't get to see that. So they don't get to see that, therefore they don't get to model it later on in their own relationships. But the biggest thing is to actually ask ourselves, which one is better? Is it better for them to not know how to reproduce or how to model a healthy relationship? Or is it better for us to allow them to go and reproduce a toxic relationship? a toxic model of a relationship. So that's the key here. We have to be mindful of that. Just because children are not seeing how to have a relationship, right? How to model a healthy relationship, that doesn't mean that we have to exchange that to give them a model of toxic relationship, because that's even worse. It's better for me personally. I have not had the chance to see that, right? But I have seen a toxic one. Now, I knew that I surely did not want to reproduce that, but I still didn't know what a healthy one looked like. But then going back and looking at my childhood, I'd rather me not just know how to model at all than to know how a toxic one looks like. Now, the only thing I would say that would be a beneficial part of it is to know how a toxic one looks like so you can avoid it. But then in that case, unfortunately, it's not really to avoid it, because children actually, they don't know, oh, that's the bad one, let me avoid it. No, what they see is, oh, that's how things should be, so let me go ahead and reproduce the same thing. Let me go ahead and model the same thing. Let me go ahead and copy the same thing. That's what children do most of the time. Now, it takes a certain child to get to a certain maturity to be able to understand, oh, no, that's unhealthy, I'm not doing that. But most of the time, when we grow up in a toxic environment, we reproduce the same toxic environment, thinking that that's the norm, right? So when we have a detachment, a healthy detachment, we can detach in a healthy manner. We can sit down and objectively, again, look at situations and look and see. And again, when I talk about toxic and how it affects children and how all that stuff, that's part of our pros and cons list. We have to put that in there, because it's not only that it will affect children too, if we have children, if they're involved in that relationship or that environment. So we have to be mindful of that. So I'll go ahead and stop it here today. It's not such a long video, but still, I'll stop it here. So just please again, I will say this in every video. Please take care of yourself. Make sure that you do your daily care, your daily self-care routine, making sure that you sleep enough, you take care of your daily habits, whatever works for you. At this point, if you've been watching the video since the beginning, at this point, we should already have something that we use that is regular, something that is functional, something that works for us on a daily basis. Being able to see what works and what doesn't work too, because just because something has worked for 2-3 weeks doesn't mean that it will continue to work, right? If something else happens in our life that comes and kind of disturbs our schedule a little bit, we have to be able to readjust things and remove something, bring something new to replace it. We have to be able to just see how things work and just readjust. The same way life should be a readjustment. Anything and everything in life should be something that can be readjusted. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is here to stay. Any and everything can come and go. Any and everything can be readjusted, right? So we have to kind of see the healing process as the same thing. Certain things might work, certain things might not work. Certain things might work for a while and then stop working. So, and then we have to switch it. It's almost something like when we take in a medication. Sometimes the doctor will give us a medication that we have to take for a long term, right? For a long term condition. And at some point, it might stop working and they have to increase the dosage, or they have to change the medication altogether, right? To give us a different class of medication. So that's kind of the same process. When we're healing, certain things we use in a daily basis to help us center ourselves, to help us regulate our nervous system, to help us when we go to therapy. Sometimes our therapist, after so long, we realize, I'm not seeing really any progress. And we might want to change the therapist altogether, and not just change therapists, but change therapists that might do something slightly different, right? That might specialize in something slightly different. So that's kind of how we have to approach things when it comes to healing. All the little tips that I give and I tell you guys on this channel that I have used, that I have seen their work, and then I have researched also. Before even I use them, I research them first. Then I use them, then they work for me. And then I realize certain things I have to change. After so long, I'll be like, oh, or also depending on the season. Let's say you're someone who walks, all right? You walk, I don't know, you walk 10 miles per day, or 10 miles is a lot, but still some people do it. But if you were one of those people, you know, and you walk, let's say you walk, even if it's 10 blocks, let me just go ahead and reduce it to 10 blocks. So you walk, I don't know, 10 blocks, right? And it's summer. Let's say you started in summer. The weather is nice, right? The weather is nice. You can go and walk. And then spring, well, spring has passed, and then winter comes along, or autumn comes. You can still walk. And then winter comes along, it's snowing. You're not going to do the same thing and walk, right? And it might be hard to do. So then we have to switch it a little bit. Maybe we will do, I don't know, indoor cycling, or we'll maybe subscribe to the gym for $10 a month, right? So we have to kind of be mindful of that certain things are not permanent in healing. Even though certain things we will use for a good 10 years, 20 years after our healing journey, we'll continue to use them, because even after we heal, it's very much necessary for us to have a routine that will keep us centered, that will keep us balanced, right? That will keep our nervous system still stable, right? Because the biggest reason we have to heal is because our nervous system has been destabilized through trauma, through abuse, right? So in order for us to make sure that we stay sane, we stay centered, we stay balanced, we have to have certain routines, certain self-care routines, because even if we're not being abused anymore, right, we go to work every day. We have day-to-day lives that we have to attend to. And that stress alone sometimes can be a lot, right? And that can kind of dysregulate our nervous system a little bit, not as much as in a traumatic or abusive uh, uh, relationship or abusive experience, right? But still, we have to be mindful of that we have to continue certain habits, certain routine, to make sure that we stay centered, right? And stay balanced. All right. So until next time, I'll go ahead and stop it right here. All right. Bye bye.